Welcome to Union Seminary. We're so glad to have all of you here. My name is Fred Davey. I'm the Executive Vice President here at Union. We are so pleased to be able to offer this lunchtime conversation with our illustrious guests, all of whom have been groundbreakers in their own way, and we'll introduce you to them in a little while. I'm joined here by my colleague and partner in crime, Dr. Yosef Surratt, who is a professor at Columbia University and who is the director of the Center on African American Religion, Sexual Politics, and Social Justice. Let me just say a word about Union and why we're doing this, and then I'd like to turn it over to Yosef, and then we're going to introduce our guests for today. Union has committed itself to being an institution that trains leaders for social justice from a faith perspective. We are Christian in tradition, but interfaith and interreligious in terms of how we live our lives here and pursue studies here on a day-to-day basis. We have taken seriously the connection between, or the intersection of, theology, public policy, and public issues. And in that vein, we sponsored a series of conversations and lectures here over at least the last 4 years that I've been here. Everything from our theology and economics series, where we had a number of notable Nobel laureate economists come and talk to a number of theologians, including our own Dr. Cornell West, whom you'll hear from a little bit later. We have had conversations here around racial justice, around the Black Lives Matters movement. We even engaged in our own demonstration around recent police killings of unarmed black men by hosting a die-in here in front of the seminary, as well as a pray-in at the local precinct after 2 police were killed in New York City. We've got a new series of events on the Hill called Union on the Hill. We had one back in January where we talked about again, theology and public policy and how important it is to bring progressive faith to the public square. And then a couple of weeks ago, we went up to talk about with congressional representatives and congressional staff the immorality of overly broad religious exemption acts. So it's in our DNA to do this kind of thing, and we thought during Pride Month, what better topic to talk about than one that's just beginning to get some traction in the American conversation, and that is a conversation about theology and sports and sexuality, and particularly given some of the courageous stances that have been taken by athletes, by collegiate and professional athletes, one of whom in particular you'll hear from today, and another of whom was a high school athlete and is now leading the way in LGBT rights and work. So you'll hear more about that in a minute. I won't jump the gun on that. But what we're doing here today is very consistent with the mission and the life of Union Theological Seminary, and I could not be happy and prouder for us to put on this Pride event and with our colleague here from Columbia. So I'll turn it over to Yosef.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you all. I'll be brief in just adding. My name is Yosef Surratt. I direct the new center at Columbia, Center on African American Religion, Sexual Politics, and Social Justice. It's one of the newer initiatives at Columbia, but extends from almost now a decade of work, much of which Fred and I have partnered on, trying to advance more progressive conversations around sexuality, not just on academic campuses, but within primarily African American communities, religious institutions, and the communities they serve. So this center launched last fall with a conference here at Columbia, Are the Gods Afraid of Black Sexuality? And so in very much the same vein, what we're doing today in this conversation and partnering extends partnerships between Union and Columbia, and is part of the work that the center, this new initiative at Columbia, is doing, both expanding academic conversations, but also partnering with leaders on the ground and activists who are interested in creating more equitable, inclusive spaces that affirm the full humanity of Black and brown folk, LGBT folk, queer identified folk, as well, and then bringing allies to the table in conversation. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. I do want to briefly acknowledge two Columbia advisors who are here, University Chaplain Julnell Davis, who is there, as well as Marcia Sells, both of whom, who's a vice president of community affairs, both of whom have provided key advice as we've tried to launch this new work, bringing Columbia in partnership with the community surrounding it. Thank you.
So we couldn't make this happen without a number of people who support this work. I'm going to not call everybody's name. Let me just thank the people at Union who also worked to make this happen. We had a small committee of administrative staff, students, and others that worked on this to make this day possible. One of the people I do want to recognize, though, is someone who is a Union alum, but who's also new to the Union staff, and who will lead a lot of this work going forward, and that's Dr. Derek Harkins, who is our Senior Vice President for Innovations in Public Programming. Derek? Is Greg Taylor here from the NBA? Well, I'll acknowledge him in absentia. Greg has been a friend for a long time and was actually very instrumental in beginning the conversation between Jason Collins and Union Seminary for today's event. I want to also acknowledge the person whose organization has made both the work that Yosef does possible and some of the work that we do here at Union possible, and that is Jason McGill, Dr. Jason McGill, who's from the Arcus Foundation. Jason. All right, so shall we ask our guests? I'll start with Caroline Desert, who is with us for this panel. She is a queer Latina originally from El Centro, California, a community on the U.S.-Mexico border. Caroline joined Immigration Equality as the executive director recently from the California State Attorney General's office, where she was a deputy attorney general in the Public Rights Division. She earned a JD from UCLA and specializes in public interest law and social justice law. We're so happy to have Caroline join us, and we look forward to hearing from you shortly. Come on up. The next person actually probably also needs no introduction, but that is Jason Collins. Jason is a retired professional basketball player who played 13 seasons in the NBA. After the 2012-2013 NBA season concluded, Jason publicly came out as gay. He became a free agent and did not play again until February 14th when he was signed by the Nets, where I actually happened to see you play, I'm happy to say. And I actually have partial season tickets now. And I'll sell them to anybody who's interested. Just kidding. When he signed with the Nets, he became the first publicly gay athlete to play in any of the 4 major North American pro sports teams. In April 2004, Jason was featured on the cover of Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Jason, we're so glad you're here with us.
Our third panelist, of course, needs no introduction. He is, by all counts, one of the most prolific and preeminent public intellectuals in the last 50 years, if not more, that we could claim the 20th and 21st century unequivocally. Dr. Cornell West is now professor of philosophy and Christian practice here at Union Theological Seminary. Many of us were introduced to him through his public work, but of course, before wading into the public waters, he single-handedly intervened in at least 3 different fields in the academy, changed so many different conversations. I remember, in fact, in my own intellectual genealogy, when my mother brought me home a copy of Race Matters when I was a junior at Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and how formative his work has been to so many of us. It's a pleasure to introduce to you, or to welcome Dr. Cornell West up to the podium. who, if I recall correctly, was not that shabby of a high school athlete. I remember him fondly recalling track meets against Charles Ogletree, reveling in running track in Northern California. So also an athlete himself. And we continue that with our moderator, who is both a colleague and a friend of mine and a former Ivy League basketball all-star, Professor Valerie Purdy Vaughns. Yes, we may welcome her. Professor Purdy Vaughns is an associate professor of psychology here at Columbia, received a BA here, came home as a professor in between studying at Stanford and also teaching at Yale. Herself is a social psychologist and the director of the Intercultural Laboratory here at Columbia University, where she specializes in stigma and diversity, thinking about the intersection of race and gender and religious identity, as well as sexual orientation and gender expression. I'm going to hand it over to Professor Purdy Vaughns, who's going to lead us into conversation this afternoon.
Thank you, Professor Surratt. Brother Cornell is over here challenging me to a track race. We'll save that for later. This morning in the New York Times, there was an article about Schuyler Baylor. Schuyler Baylor was recruited at Harvard University to be on the swim team. She was recruited as female and was recruited to swim on the women's team. After months and months of anguish, difficulty talking to the female women's coach, she said that she really felt that she was male and she didn't want to enter Harvard disingenuous, and that she wanted to compete as a man on the men's team. Rather than being rejected by her peers, rejected by the women's team, rejected by the men's team, in a monumental move, the Harvard's men's swimming team and the Harvard women's swimming team came together and said that he could compete in whatever identity that he felt most comfortable. And so he announced that he was going to compete as a male on the Harvard's male swimming team. Will be competing this fall as the first transgender swimmer in the NCAA and the first openly transgender athlete in the NCAA. When we hear stories like this, and we listen to the story of Jason and Caroline and many, many others in this room and across the country, we think that times are changing and the walls around sports and sexuality have forever changed. But behind every one of these stories are also stories of pain. There are also stories of struggle. There are also stories of the many, many, many individuals who do not come out and continue to live lives on teams that are very difficult. And in those moments, it is our faith that we turn to, the ministries that are in the NFL, the NHL, Major League Baseball, that help, that can either help or be problematic in terms of moving us through the path of spirituality as we think about sports. So today, perhaps for the first time, we're going to have a conversation that brings many of these different dimensions into the room. The dimensions of sports. Every one of us, whether we dreamed of being a ballerina or a football player or a hockey player, a rugby player, European handball player, many of us have dreams. Some of us continue to have them. Some of them faded a long time ago with respect to sports. When we think about our children, one of the most important dimensions under which children learn about gender and sexuality is through sports. We will bring that into conversation with spirituality and religion and ministry, thinking about what is it about our faith that we can either turn to, or what is it about our faith that we need to change or rethink in the domain of sports. And we will also be thinking about the dimensions of what it means to be masculine or feminine in these times where we bring together all of these very, very different worlds meeting here on the stage for the first time. So what I'd like to do as far as a format for this afternoon is each panelist will have approximately 5 minutes to open the discussion in any way. We'd like them to share some of their stories, share thoughts, any kind of conversations you'd like to share with the audience, and then we'll continue to moderate. We'll then have a Q&A where we'll open up to the entire audience. So Caroline, why don't we start with you? Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all so much for having me. My name is Caroline Desert. I'm a queer Latina originally from El Centro, which is a rural farming community on the California and Mexico border. I had the distinct pleasure of being at the highest court of our nation on Friday morning as Justice Kennedy announced that same-sex couples and their love and their marriages and really the humanity of LGBT people are equal under the law. It was a profound moment. It was a profound moment for our community. For me personally, as a former regional field director for the No on 8 campaign against Proposition 8, which stripped same-sex couples of the right to marry in California in 2008, it was a moment of triumph. And as huge of a historical leap it was for our community, the work is not yet done. Currently, I'm the Executive Director of Immigration Equality. We are the nation's largest direct legal service provider for LGBT people who are seeking asylum. It is still a crime to be LGBT in more than 80 countries and many more where it is fundamentally unsafe. And so when people flee persecution from fundamentally unsafe countries, we're the lawyers that represent them in their claim for asylum. We have about 550 open cases in 25 states in the US, and we're growing to serve even more because more and more people are fleeing persecution every day. And so we have to grow so that we can meet that need and ensure that everyone has a safe place to call home. So Friday was an incredible day, and our community has fought so long and so hard to be treated equally under the law, especially with the dignity of our love and our relationships. But there is still so much work to do. Our trans community in particular, our trans community of color, our Black and Latino trans community face violence every day. In detention centers, in institutions of incarceration, and even on the streets. And so we continue to struggle. This is a community that was born fighting. This was a revolution that was started in the LGBT community 46 years ago at a bar here in New York, Stonewall Bar, where trans women of color stood up and refused to be treated without the dignity and respect that they deserve, refused to be treated at the hands of law enforcement in a violent way, and stood up and helped spark this revolution that on Friday led to a Supreme Court victory. So there is still so much work left to be done. I'm honored to be here to talk about some of that work in our faith communities, some of that work in communities of color, some of that work really throughout the entire United States as we take one step, but only one step, towards equality in the United States. I was an athlete in high school. I went to an all-girls Catholic boarding school that was a blue ribbon academic institution and got a partial scholarship to play sports. I played volleyball, I played my favorite sport, basketball, and also all the field of the track and field, throwing things and jumping. And when it was discovered that I was in love with another student, my parents took me out of boarding school and moving back home to El Centro. It's one of the most devastating things that had ever happened, and sports were the way that I coped with what was a loss of the greatest opportunity I had ever been given in life, and a community that I had made over 3 years living without my family amongst a student community. And the first people I came out to back in my rural, about 80% Mexican and predominantly Catholic community were the people on my basketball team. Because the camaraderie that comes with sports, when you're literally, as Jason says, in a contact sport where you're literally blocking for people, the bonds that formed there were so deep, it felt so disingenuous to me to sit there while my teammates talked about their boyfriends and not to talk about my girlfriend. So I had really, really the privilege of coming out to my basketball team and being accepted. And that was one of the ways I got through. Was a very, very difficult year. It's not that way for everybody. Many people continue to compete at the high school level, at the collegiate level, and the professional level in the shadows of the closet. Growing up in El Centro, I saw two different people living in the shadows. I saw our LGBT community, who was often bullied and beaten up, and I also saw our undocumented immigrant community, those living in the shadows without job protection, without health care, and without security. And so, one of the reasons I'm here in New York, moved from California just 8 months ago to be the executive director of immigration equality, was to work at the intersection of those two communities I saw growing up living in the shadows, those in the undocumented community and those in the LGBT community. So it is an honor to be here. I'm a person of faith. I still identify as Catholic, and my relationship with God is sacred and personal. It's been difficult for me to find a community of faith that is open and affirming. When I lived in San Francisco working for the California Attorney General, there was a beautiful community at USF, Jesuit school, and that was the first place that I went to church with my girlfriend, holding hands, my partner. And I really want that experience for everybody, that so many communities of faith that aren't open and affirming, how painful that is to be a person of faith and have a deeply reverent relationship with God, and to have a community that doesn't support that, because so much of faith is practiced in community. And so, I've had the experience of not being accepted in a community of faith, and I've had the experience of being accepted. And I hope one day to live in a world where all communities of faith accept all people. So I think we have a lot to talk about. You've heard quite enough from me. I just want to say thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Collins. I played 13 years in the NBA. I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm another Southern Californian kid. I have a twin brother named Jaron. We were born 8 minutes apart, partly because my parents were only expecting one child. So you can imagine their surprise when the nurse says to the doctor, there's one more in there. We grew up playing sports. We were very tall. I don't think you mentioned your partner is a school teacher. Yes. And you said that she's 5'3", and she's teaching the 6th grade. Well, I was taller than her in the 3rd grade. So, sports came, but because we grew up so quickly, we were actually a little uncoordinated. Our coordination didn't quite kick in until we were on 12, but sports came naturally to us. We played every single sport growing up until the 8th grade, and that's when the focus we turned to basketball. And the purpose, we loved basketball, but the purpose was to get a Division I scholarship. We come from a family, very middle class. We didn't have everything, but we had enough to get by, and we didn't want to be a financial burden to our parents. So basketball, getting that Division I scholarship was very important to us. Additionally, education is extremely important to my family. My grandfather was the first in our family to graduate from college. He went to Southern University. My grandmother graduated from college in her 40s while maintaining a full-time job and raising her 2 daughters. My aunt has been an inspiration to me. My mom's sister, she graduated from high school at 16, did college in 3 years, graduated from Georgetown Law School, and ultimately became the first African-American woman female Superior Court judge in San Francisco history. And she is the first family member that I came out to. And I came out to her, I didn't come out in, you came out in junior high school. High school, my struggle took a very long journey. Took me 33 years for me to say the words, finally, I am gay, to another human being. And part of that was because basketball was so much, I just devoted everything to basketball. That was my release. But in the 2010, before the start of the 2010 season, we had the NBA lockout, and I didn't have basketball. I didn't have that thing to focus on. And I remember sitting on a couch with my German Shepherd thinking, is this going to be it for the rest of my life? So I told a friend and then told my aunt and played a season with the Atlanta Hawks. And then after that season was over, I told more and more family members. Ultimately playing the 2012-2013 season with the Boston Celtics and Washington Wizards, with a lot of members of my family knowing. The biggest hurdle after telling my parents was telling my grandmother. My grandmother, my mom's mom, she's the matriarch of our family. She's the backbone. She's always a person talking about the foundation of the family and what kind of ingredients are we going to pass to the next generation. And she's also a woman. Just picture a woman in her mid-80s who has a Bible in one hand and a belt in the other one. She is from Hodge, Louisiana, outside of Monroe, for those who are familiar with Louisiana. Grew up in segregated South, and just always ends a conversation with put God in front, or everything is deeply religious to her. And I wish that she was here. She's still with us. She's a fighter. 6.5 years ago, she was only given 6 months to live. She has stomach cancer, and she's still with us, and I strongly believe it's because of her faith, and she's a fighter. And a lot of my faith comes from her. She would send me, because of basketball, I couldn't attend church regularly, but she would send me a little prayer book, The Daily Word, and it has a little, I don't know, for some of you know, yeah, The Daily Word. So that was my connection to my spirituality for a long time. And sort of, Caroline said, finding a church that, once I came out, that was the biggest surprise for me, was because I was always a spiritual person, and I always had my relationship with God. I trusted that relationship and trust that relationship with God. I truly believe in God and truly believe that He has a plan for me and for everyone. But attending different churches and seeing some people use religion as a way to divide people, I got a little, I just lost my faith sort of in the messenger and the person that was delivering that message. And that was one of the surprising things, was finding a church in Los Angeles where it's come as you are, you're welcome. Doesn't matter what you believe in, just come, sit, be a part of the community, and feel welcome. And that church is Mosaic in Los Angeles, and it's really given me a new sense and really recharged my spirituality. And again, I'll call my grandmother every Sunday, on my way to see her, or on my way to church, and we'll have that talk about spirituality. And the cool thing about Mosaic is that now it's a New Age church, so you can live stream it if you're traveling, which is nice, because I travel so much. But the key thing for me was, when I did come out, was trying to start that conversation. I found, and as many of us have found, that sports, it's an easy way for people to talk about issues that they might not talk about. Sometimes it's difficult for two straight guys to have a talk about LGBT issues. But when you put in the context of sports and you say, hey, did you see that football player who came out? Or, hey, did you see that basketball player who came out? It's an easy way to have that conversation, and it's only through those conversations that people's hearts and minds will change. And I'm glad to be a part of that and to continue that with you here today. Thank you.
What a blessing for me to be here. I want to salute Brother Fred, Brother Joseph, and the others who facilitated our coming together, and to be on this panel with such distinguished, not just professors or athletes, but they're really freedom fighters in their own distinctive ways. And that really is my starting point, because I really am very old school. I begin with a tradition that produced me. I am who I am because somebody loved me, somebody cared for me, somebody attended to me, and that's the West Family Shiloh Baptist Church, and then on to college. And so it was my attempt to come to terms with what it means to be so hated and hunted and haunted, what it means to deal with contempt coming your way, and what was it about the tradition that produced me of black people in the face of so much terror and trauma and stigma still dishing out so much love. That's where Frederick Douglass comes from, that's where John Coltrane comes from, that's where Martin King comes from, that's where Audre Lorde comes from, that's where Langston Hughes comes from, that's where Lorraine Hansberry comes from. All of them having different sexual orientations, but they were mustering the courage to wrestle with probably the most frightening question all of us have to come to terms with, which is, what does it mean to be human, and do we have the courage to stay in contact with other people's humanity, especially those who have been hated and haunted and hunted down, you see. And so this past week was, in fact, a very important week for me, because I am very much concerned about how we come up with ways of affirming the humanity of people across the board. And marriage equality is a particular way of affirming the humanity of precious gay brothers and lesbian sisters and bisexual and transgender folk. Now, it's true, 1967, with Loving v. Virginia, when they affirmed interracial marriage, that many of us in the black community, we didn't break dance over that, because the end of black struggle for black freedom was not to marry white brothers and sisters. It was for freedom. And for those who choose, that's fine. But we knew that it was still a moment, a crucial moment. In the same way when they allow for gay brothers and sisters to join the military. I'm anti-militaristic, so I'm not going to break dance over that. But I affirm it because it's another way in which the very narrow bourgeois order can affirm the humanity of a people who have been hated and haunted and degraded. And all of us have to deal with the concessions of the powers that be, because for me, the vicious legacy of white supremacy, the vicious legacy of male supremacy, the vicious legacy of homophobia, we go on, anti-Jewish hatred, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim hatred, anti-Latino hatred. These things are all evils. And most of our society is in a state of denial about it, either because they think they feel impotent and can't do anything about it, or they're scared, don't want to tell the truth about it, or don't want to sacrifice enough to engage in organizing against it. And so in the context of Ferguson, Baltimore, Staten Island, Oakland on the one hand, Arizona, California, the magnificent wave of activism among immigrants, so-called undocumented peoples and so forth, and also in the context of increasing concerns about drones dropping bombs on innocent people in Libya and Afghanistan. It's very difficult to talk about lives matter if it just stops at the border. Now, I begin with Black Lives Matter because my mama's black. So I'm unapologetic about that, but it's not going to stop there. I'm an American, but it's not going to stop there, because as a Christian, I fundamentally believe, and I'm a fundamentalist about this line in the Bible, love thy neighbor as thyself. And it's part because we're all made in the likeness and image of God. And if we can keep track of that likeness and image, then we will be in the world but not of it, which is to say we'll be over against the evils in the world. But those evils in the world are always strong, very, very powerful. And the love that Christians are committed to, the love that secular folk may be committed to, or Buddhists or Hindus or others who make these kinds of choices to be on the love train, will always pit you over against the lies, the mendacity, the criminality, all the various rationalizations for us to somehow defer to a status quo in which people, slices of God's children, are being hated and hunted and haunted haunted it. That's why for me, I'm just so blessed to be here. I come to learn and listen, because as a straight brother coming out of black church and on the corner of the nightclubs and other things, I picked up a lot of homophobia, so I had to do a lot of killing inside of myself to deal with that. You see, just like I got a lot of male supremacy too. I got to work it through.
We're going to help you with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But last point though, but even as a black man of 62 years old, living in America and in my right mind most days of the week, that I got white supremacy inside of me too. I grew up in America. I got to kill it every day. I want to stay in contact with the humanity of others as well as myself, because no one of us are pure or pristine. No one of us free of spot or wrinkle. That's what it means to acknowledge the degree to which we have to wrestle with our humanity.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I'm sorry. So I have just a question or two just to get our panel started, and then we'll open it up to the floor. For those of us who have not been in locker rooms, who have not sat on the bench, who have not been on airplanes, which is actually all of us, because you guys had private jets, but varsity basketball, especially women, we didn't. However, let us in on the world of sports. I know that both of you can only speak about basketball, and there's so many other sports, but can you let us into the world of the locker room, the bench, the coaches, the fans, and what it's like to be questioning our LGBT in that context? Because I want to give all of us a clear understanding of what we're actually up against. Maybe we'll start with Jason and then move to Caroline.
Sure. When you're a part of a team, especially an NBA team, they really become your family. You spend so much time in practice, traveling on the road, and games. And just like most families, there are going to be those arguments, those squabbles. I've been very fortunate because for the majority of my NBA career, I've been on some very good teams. I played 13 years. 10 of those years, we went to the postseason, went to the playoffs, and been to the NBA Finals twice. But the first thing that comes to mind when you say, what is it like inside the locker room? I think of open night, mic night at your local comedy club, where you walk into the locker room and guys will just start ripping on each other about anything. It could be like, look at those shoes. It could be, what are you wearing? And a lot of people use humor to bring people together, because through humor you can deal with difficult issues. Also in the locker room, there is a lot of, stick your chest out. I'm the biggest, I'm the strongest, I'm the highest paid, I'm the superstar. Kind of know your role in the family, on the team, but also be proud and just walk, with your chest out. When you're on the court and you're playing your opponent, a lot of the times when you're talking to your opponent, it's not, hey, how are you doing? It's I'm out here to kick your butt. I'm in a church, so I'm not gonna curse. I'm out here to kick your butt because I have to make a living, and I have to continue making a living. And every day you're on the court, it's like you have to either go out there and improve your reputation or earn your reputation. Your reputation will go places you will never go. And some of the lines that you use will be try to get into someone's head, and the easiest way is to cut them, cut their masculinity, cut their, make them, shrink, make them think that, oh, I'm afraid of that guy, or I don't want to go up against that guy. I want to be more physical. You want to be more aggressive. So that's kind of what it's like when you're, day to day in the locker room, and some of the language that is used can be very homophobic. I remember one time, I won't say what team, but I actually remember keeping track, okay, was homophobic language being used on this day? And I would keep a log, and after, got about 3 weeks, I just stopped keeping track because it just got really depressing. And there is a culture out there, but the one silver lining is that when I did come out and when I played with the Nets, I didn't hear any of that. So it's sort of like a catch-22, like where you want the culture to change, but it's almost like you need people to step up so that they have those examples, and then people will change when they know that there's someone in the room with them.
Which raises the question of whether the culture is changing or whether it's just changing around you, which is another issue.
Yeah. But I do feel that the culture does change because they know me. I'm part. Again, it goes back to okay. Now I know I have an LGBT family member. Then people change. I've had family members like that who, when I was growing up, were homophobic. When I came out, all of a sudden, it took them a little bit of time, but now they're some of the strongest allies because they're like, that's not the gay person, that's Jason. That's my family, that's my teammate, that's my brother, that's my son, that's whatever. So I have to protect and love and forces people to grow in ways that probably they weren't even thinking about.
Thank you. Carolyn, can you help us with this as well? What's it like?
Yeah, well, first I'm going to say, growing up, we're always looking for people to admire. We're looking for idols. We're looking for heroes, especially young people. And growing up, I looked up to Billie Jean King, who broke so many ceilings, both for gay women in sports and just for women in sports. But I just gotta say really quickly, the Jason Collins of this world are gonna change sports in America, and it's an honor to sit here next to you. It really is. I am sure that it changed the Nets to have Jason Collins on their team. It also changed the game of basketball for every person playing in rural and small towns across the United States who know that they're gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender, and finally had an athlete who was out and active in the NBA, fighting to be who he is and to come out so publicly. So there is so much left to be done. That's the common thread here. There's so much in sports to continue to change. But I think having a hero, having someone to set the example of what it means to be your authentic self and to be a truly outstanding athlete is really was a void that was missing. I think it's a necessary part of the change in the dialogue. It's always hardest for the first one to come out, but we're going to have more. We're going to have more in all levels of sports. When I played basketball, my senior year of high school, I played as an out athlete, and that was an incredible experience to be accepted with my teammates who I was so close to, and to have them have my back in the broader school, because of course word trickled out that I was gay, and I was the first out gay person in my high school. And from then I started Gay Straight Alliance, the first in my high school, and that was because of the support that I got from my team members. The next season in the high school sports year was track and field. I did discus, shot put, long jump, triple jump, and high jump. And I didn't feel the need to come out to my team then. We weren't as close. It's more of an individual sport. And so there was a difference there. And so, I think everybody should be out and proud no matter what sport you're playing, but that there was a difference there. The lack of closeness was not conducive to a supportive enough environment for me to just say to the whole team in the locker room, this is who I am. And so yes, I came out with my basketball team in a very public way, but that didn't follow to the next sport because it didn't feel as close and supportive. And I also felt like most people already knew, and we didn't need to go there again. But even then, coming out isn't linear, right? Sometimes we have a lot of older folks who are LGBT in the aging community, seniors who often have to go back in the closet when they have to seek assisted living. And so, the coming out is not a linear process, and sometimes we take one step forward and we have to take another step back because it's an unsafe it's an unsafe environment to do so.
And maybe Brother West, if you could give us a little bit of some insight on the relationship between sports and theology. I think it's just so symbolic that we are having this conversation in this room. Riverside Church for decades has had midnight basketball, so many sports that have changed many, many young men and women's lives. And so there's always been a very intimate relationship between sports as a way to engage in social justice and ministry. At the same time, not every church, synagogue, mosque is as accepting as it could be. And so there is this complicated relationship between sports and theology and ministry. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that, and then we'll open it up.
Just very briefly. One is that the United States is the most market-driven society in the history of the world. It's all about money. The business of America is business, Calvin Coolidge said, as he slept about 6 hours every day in the White House. America is also the most religiously saturated of modern societies. You see. So you got the haven in a heartless world. The market is heartless, is dog eat dog. Religion, some distance from the brutality of the market. And religion's tied to non-market values: love, justice, fidelity, faith, hope, and so on. Now, what does that mean? Sports and entertainment have an ambiguous status, because on the one hand, sports, we know, is a kind of religion in the history of the United States. So it's a particular kind of transcendence from the market, but on the other hand, sports is also market-driven to the core. So you got the performance that takes place, but it's market-driven. At the same time, sports is one of the few sites where there's a structure of fairness. That's why Jack Johnson and Jackie Robinson and Althea Gibson and Muhammad Ali and others, that when you enter that sports arena, there's a fair set of rules. And as soon as the performance is over, it's right back to white supremacy again. See, as soon as Joe Louis knocked the white brother out, he knew he was walking right back into racist America. But black people celebrate because they finally have a structure of fairness. You get black, white going at each other with the same rules. Black folk win. And of course, as we know, when Jack Johnson knocked out white folk, what happened? Riots all across the nation. Black people were hunted down, shot, and killed. I was just in Australia 2 weeks ago. Jack Johnson went to Australia. 1908, knocked out another white brother until next week. The riots all over Australia because the white supremacists in Australia, they couldn't put up with the idea of a black man beating a white person in a context in which there was fair rules operating. And so sports, kind of entertainment, very ambiguous, because what does that mean? It means that a lot of oppressed people are going to do very well in sports because it's the only context where they are treated fairly. And they get the memo, so they practice beginning at 4 or 5 years old, practicing basketball, football, whatever it is, in order to be treated fairly and to make some money. But there's a matter of dignity as well as just money making that goes on. But at the same time, the structure of the sport is still deeply white supremacist. My hunch is, in the sports that you all are in, if you go further up in terms of who makes the ultimate decisions, it's going to look more like the National Hockey League than it is the NBA. At the highest levels of power, because that's where the fundamental decisions are still made. And so it's a complicated matter, and I just want to throw that out there because, does that make sense to you, my dear?
Yes, it does, but we need to update your sports examples with Joe Louis.
No.
You are dating yourself.
No, we're not dating. It's like Mahalia Jackson. She's not dated. She's just a giant. That's all. Joe's a giant. But you're right. but a lot of these younger brothers and sisters, they don't have the same gravitas that Joe Lewis had, that Jack Johnson had, that Althea Gibson had. But you're right, I'm old school. Yeah, I'm with you.
Nothing wrong with old school.
We're together on that. We're together.
What I would like to do is open up the floor. There are so many issues that I think are on the table. There's so many questions that people have in the audience. What I'd like to do is, if you have a question, maybe we can open up the panel. If you have a question, do people line up, or you're going to will you pass the microphone? Why don't we start with you as an opening question? Yeah.
So I have a comment and a two-folded question.
And can you introduce yourself, brother?
Oh, okay. See, I think I'm a superstar.
A quick
Problem.
introduction.
It's my problem.
A
So
quick
my name is
introduction.
Michael Robertson. I did my MDiv here, STM here. I am the scholar in residence for the Center for Race, Religion, and Economic Democracy here at Union Theological Seminary, created by my great sister, Charlene St. Clair.
Welcome.
So, thank you. So I have a comment and a two-folded question. One is, utterly, it is an important time that we celebrate you, Jason Collins, and the executive director of New York City Black LGBT Pride is in the room, and what you may not be aware of, probably not aware of, that they are awarding you this August. And so you're getting the Heritage Award, and I'm sure, so Lee, could you stand up? He will be wanting to talk to you, so.
Okay. Thank you.
So Carolyn, you nicely brought in 46 years ago the emblematic event that particularly marks the LGBT movement, which was Stonewall, right? And I'm thinking about in 1973, 4 years later, Puerto Rican trans woman named Silva Rivera at a gay liberation rally forced her body on stage, right? And began to have a conversation around the white gay men who would not allow her to be on stage. Partly, she was voicing the notion that we have created this thing called white gay middle classism that has excluded particularly trans bodies who've put their bodies on the line, right? And then in 1981, clearly this is the onset of the AIDS epidemic, and Vito Russo wrote a wonderful text called Why We Fight. Why do I bring this up? I'm wondering, is there a slippery slope? Is there something that we need to be cautious around with this Supreme Court decision, in many ways usurping marriage equality as the #1 issue impacting LGBT folks, specifically in relationship with the fact that black trans women continue to get murdered in such a way, black gay men have the highest HIV prevalence rate, not in the country, but in the world outside of Botswana. So that's one. The other thing is...
Why don't we let her answer the question? Yes.
Yes, there's concern, absolutely. So, marriage equality. So many young people like myself who have found a way to leadership in the LGBT community worked on issues like the No on 8 campaign in California, trying to advocate for marriage equality for LGBT people, in part because there were jobs there, in part because we knew that it was a vehicle to equality. Yes, the issue was marriage equality, but marriage equality was a vehicle to greater acceptance. Now the question is it a vehicle of greater acceptance for marginalized folks within the LGBT community, queer people of color, particularly trans people of color? And so, I can't tell you how excited I am to be the executive director of this organization, Immigration Equality, that serves only folks living at or below the poverty line, fleeing fundamentally unsafe places, who are undocumented, who often do not speak English, who are 22% HIV positive, and who have experiences with violence that are unspeakable. So it is no accident that I have this job. I've been waiting for the moment where I could have this job. I learned some amazing lessons from fighting for marriage equality, about messaging, about organizing, about fundraising, so that we can sustain a movement that's focused on serving the most vulnerable. I have been waiting for this moment where marriage equality is something we have won so that we can refocus the LGBT community on serving the most vulnerable people who really need it. I think the LGBT community has that opportunity now. I think it's an unprecedented opportunity that every organization, every LGBT organization, the national ones, the statewide ones, the local ones, look at what you're spending money on, look at your budget, and ask yourself, how can you refocus your organization, redouble down, and recommit yourself to fighting for those who are the most vulnerable, for those who have experience with violence, for our communities of color? How do you link your organization so that Black Lives Matter, so that Trans Lives Matter is not a coalition event you participate in every 2 months, but is a core part of your mission? How do you redefine your work so that those communities and the safety of really everyone, of all of our humanity, are central, not side issues, not a program, your organizational mission? And so I'm really, truly proud and privileged to work for an organization that works exclusively for serving the most vulnerable, those at or below the poverty line, those seeking a safe place to call home. And I really call upon all the other LGBT leaders to join me in advocating and redefining the LGBT movement to serve the most vulnerable.
That was good. And briefly, this is actually to you, Dr. Purdy Barnes. You brought in, when we were sitting in the Bonhoeffer room, the notion of how gender has a relationship to gender expression and sexuality. And I wonder, when you talked about the young trans man who is now being allowed to be on a swim team, I'm wondering, is there a relationship to gender and racial power, right? So what does it mean for then this trans man to step into power and to be allowed to be on a man's team versus a trans woman whose belief is you're stepping out of power, but you have more power, brute power, in relationship to women? Would there be the same kind of acceptance?
That's an excellent question, and I think the core that what it gets at is the really complicated relationship between masculinity, femininity, and the type of sport. So swimming is is interesting because I think it's relatively more gender neutral than, say, hockey or basketball or baseball or football or gymnastics or ballet, right? So in that respect, I think there's a little bit more flexibility. I do think that there is greater, I think that regardless of whether you're transitioning from female to male or male to female, there's always going to be complications with respect to acceptance. I'm not sure. I think the issue of sort of stepping out of femininity and into masculinity in the role of athleticism is particularly interesting, and I thought it was particularly noteworthy in that article that the entire Harvard men's swim team was they claimed to be very embracing him. What's also the sort of unspoken issue in that particular article about Skylar Baylor is that when he was going to swim as a she would have been one of the most dominant swimmers perhaps in the NCAA. So there was a personal giving up of athletic power, to the extent that winning is power, to transition to male and then probably be a mediocre swimmer. So I think in that case, there might be a gaining of power vis-a-vis masculinity, but a losing of power vis-a-vis athletic prowess. And when you're an athlete and you want to win, that's everything. So to me, that speaks to the power of the need for individuals to be recognized as themselves, because to give up to be the #1 slot in the NCAA as a woman, to swim as a man is, as an athlete, you know that's just really giving up a lot.
I'll just add, really quickly, one of the things about sports is that it reinforces the gender binary. So trans can mean two things. Trans, assigned female at birth but identify as male, and then trans, assigned male at birth, identify as female. But then there's also a gender non-conforming community. Anybody outside of that strict gender binary of male and female, where do they belong in the world of sports? If Skylar's transitioning very publicly in a brave and incredible way, this fabulous trans male, where would this individual be if this person identified, not strongly with either gender? There is a growing need to support the gender non-conforming community and to support folks who are transitioning and to let folks choose how far a transition is authentic to them. And so the LGBT community needs to step up and support the gender nonconforming community. Absolutely, but I worry about sports, that there's such a binary, there's men's teams and there's women's teams, and so where does somebody who's gender nonconforming, where does that person belong? And I think that as we have a growing gender nonconforming community in the LGBT community, that's something that the world of sports is going to have to answer.
Thank you, thank you. Yes.
Michael Livingston, I'm the executive minister at the Riverside Church, and thank you, Dr. Purdy Vaughn, for your
Welcome.
recognition of the Riverside Hawks basketball program. And Dr. West is exactly right. Sports is a kind of religion, and I confess, still being a diehard UCLA Bruin fan, so I'm really sorry. Yes, thank you, yes, but Jason...
It's okay. We kicked your butt.
And we wish you and the Lopez brothers had gone to UCLA. I wanted to ask Jason if you could give us some insight into what is happening in the NBA now. So you make your announcement, you come out with the kind of courage that has really encouraged us all, and it just appears to be silence. What is happening among the players, others that you may know of who?
Yeah, well, I'll talk about from the NBA, the league perspective. They continue to set the tone as far as being a place where they're sending out signals that it's okay to be gay. They're sending out signals to players who are in the closet that the culture is ready for you, that the NBA is ready for you. Now, that might vary, though, team to team, because each individual team has its own culture, has its own way of going about how inclusive they are. We just saw over the weekend with marriage equality, but recently the Golden State Warriors won the NBA championship, and I have to put this out there, my brother is an assistant coach for the Golden State Warriors, so I'm very happy for him. But the team president for the Golden State Warriors, Rick Welts, he is openly gay, and is probably in professional sports, I think he's the only openly gay president in the Big Four sports leagues. And he was the grand marshal for the San Francisco Pride Parade, and his husband, him, and the NBA trophy were in the Pride Parade, and it was the first time ever that the NBA trophy participated in a Pride Parade. So that was really cool, and I was very happy to see the Golden State Warriors put out a tweet on social media, and that the NBA retweeted that. Again, sending those signals, those micro signals that, being LGBT, being gay, that they will have your back, that they celebrate it, that they support it. And right now I work with an organization called Athlete Ally, and I see Ashlyn from Athlete Ally there in the back. So the NBA draft happened last week. In August, all of the players drafted will go through something called Rookie Transition Program, where they will have people come to them, talk to them about their finances, come to them, talk to them about, okay, don't stay out past 2 a.m. because most of the bad stories in the press start off with at 3 a.m. so-and-so, blah, 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 bad story. Another thing that they'll talk to them about is diversity, language, inclusion, acceptance, the culture of NBA and how it's changing. I now work for the NBA, and I will go partner with Athlete Ally, and we'll put on a program with the players and really get them talking. Again, the key thing is to have those conversations with the players, have them talking about the issues. And we will sit in a room and they'll do a breakout session, so make sure it's not just a big room like this. We will be in small breakout sessions where we'll start the conversation, but then we'll go around the room and look at the players and make sure they have something to contribute, that they say something. And I remember distinctly last year, one player raised his hand and said, "What does LGBT stand for?" And back to the basics. It's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and saying those words and explaining, because a lot of people aren't in sports, they're not really coming from a place of hate. It's just lack of awareness, lack of exposure. So you have to educate, and again, it goes back to me, education is so important. And I'm very proud that the NBA has those programs. And I know that Major League Baseball has similar type programs. NFL also has similar, they work with You Can Play Project. Wade Davis, the head of that organization, he's a former NFL player. He goes around to the different teams. And actually, the You Can Play Project was just announced a couple of days ago. They're going to win an award from ESPN and ESPYs. And again, starting the conversation, this year's Arthur Ashe winner for Courage and with the ESPYs is going to be Caitlyn Jenner. And we all saw what kind of conversation the 2020 interview had, and when Caitlyn was introduced to the country, fastest ever on social media and Twitter to get over 1 million followers. Again, having those conversations, having people talk about it will lead to people changing in their hearts and minds.
Thank you, thank you. We'll have the next question.
Hi, my name's Keisha. I'm also a student and a staff person here. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about the role of masculinity within the context of this conversation, just on sort of two realms. On one realm, the global women's soccer leagues, global women's rugby teams, women's sports have been, women athletes have been out for a long time. And I feel like they don't get as much rep because women's sports in general is not as popular or as much of a religion as male sports are, the WNBA. And so the context of sexuality in sports is often centered around male sexuality. And I wonder what we're missing out by not talking about female sexuality in terms of what it means and what role masculinity plays in that conversation. Especially, and if we also look at the trans athlete at Harvard, I am a former NCAA swimmer, and I think swimming is extremely gendered. And I think the conversation would be a lot different if it were a male to female transition, because the problem is the acquisition of power, and the NCAA had no problem the female athlete giving up their power, right? So like we didn't have a problem someone being a slower swimmer, but we would have a problem with someone being a faster swimmer. And so, and it's the same conversation with male athletes coming out compared to female athletes coming out. We don't mind putting the spotlight on people giving up power, but we don't like to talk about what it means for female athletes to do that. And so I wonder if we can sort of focus on the role of masculinity within the context of this conversation.
Okay, well, first of all, I just want to, Caroline, you were talking about heroes. As a young athlete, I knew that I was gay, I just didn't accept it. But I was looking for who are the LGBT athletes that I can look up to, I can idolize. And for me, there weren't male athletes. My LGBT athletes that I idolized, again, Billie Jean King and Martina Navratilova. And I am so thankful for, and I've had the opportunity to meet and talk with both of them. And I just, even to this day, Martina, I'm still like starstruck and just like in awe, like, hi Martina, like, because she is such a hero of mine. And I'm so proud of those women that do step forward. And it goes back to, our country. I think looking at when a man does something versus when a woman does something, you have that gender bias that exists, and it's unfortunate that it's that way. Because a couple months or a month before I did, at least a month, Brittany Griner came out before I did. WNBA player, incredible player, huge fan of hers. Yet it was my story that got, on the cover of Sports Illustrated and all that. A lot of that is gender bias that just exists in our society. And like, how do we challenge that? How do we, and you expose it, you call it out when it is. But as the athlete, I'm just so proud of everyone who does step forward, because everything goes back to sports for me, and we're all on the same team. We all want the same thing. We want quality, we want acceptance, we want level playing field, and all of that. So, whether you're man or woman, transgendered man or woman, we're all on the same team. We all want the same thing.
I think also to add to that, one of the issues that you're getting at the core issue is the issue of intersectionality, the relationship between gender and sexuality. And when people think of what it means to be the dominant individual who's LGBT, in our minds we automatically think of a male. On top of that, in the domain of athletics, when we think about the dominant athletic paradigm, we think about men and male athletes. And so this issue of gender bias is really, so makes the spotlight on, say, Jason's coming out story that much more unusual, and therefore that much more sort of worthy and noteworthy. So it's not to say that's not noteworthy, but there is this gender sexuality dynamic that we see both in society, and it's even more powerful in sports. And that tells us that when sports and masculinity come together, people assume, there's actually a newspaper article saying that Cheryl Swoops is not gay. And that was noteworthy because there was this assumption that she was. So that means that we need to deconstruct, sort of unpack these issues of gender and sexuality in the domain of sports.
But it seems to me that there's a very deep and difficult philosophical question about the very nature of the kind of sports that America is in love with. Because even when our brother, you said twice now, we're going to kick their butts. And I'm thinking what Jesus would say. That is to say, you got Alexander the Great, who conquers and dominates. And the role of the sports is to conquer and dominate. Then you got Jesus the Great, who loves and is crucified. So his conception of how you wrestle with the world does have martial activity. It's a warfare going on, but it's a warfare in which you're serving others and willing to sacrifice. Alexander has a martial conception in which you're dominating. Well, the sports that we're talking about, go back to the Greeks and the Romans, it's all about domination. It's all about conquering. And so there's no accident that male sports, in which the aim is not just to dominate, but to do it in such a way that you humiliate the folk you're dominating, and you do it with spectacle. So everybody want to see. Everybody want to see it. So if you turn on the TV, let's see how they kick their butts tonight. Well, you see, there's not a lot of Christian spirit in that in terms of sensibility to weak and vulnerable. Now, on the other hand, you say, well, Brother West, that's just the way it is. We like to kick butts and love our neighbor at the same time. Well, okay, then we can talk about it. But we have to understand what the very structure of the sports are. And for me, I must say, and I'd be love to get your view about this, when you talk about college sports, I'm thoroughly convinced it's primarily in basketball. It's just black men getting exploited, deeply exploited, because they ain't making no money. Where is all the money making? It's spectacle, and only about a small percentage going to even make it into the NBA thing. And the graduation rates, universities don't give a damn about, because all you're doing is using these folk, squeezing out all of their magnificent talent, and then spitting them out. Well, you see, black folk been chewed up and split out ever since we got here 400 years ago. Our talent becomes a site for money making, and usually black folk ain't making the money. Then you go on in the NBA, and that's the feeder. And I say, ooh, these are some deep structural issues. So as much as I want to support my precious gay brothers and lesbian sisters and others into the structure, we got to keep track of the very structure itself, even as it becomes more colorful, more diverse, more lesbian sisters, gay brothers. If it's the same structure and the end is primarily just domination, making money for a small group of folk at the top, I don't think Jesus would be crazy about that. I don't think she could be crazy. But that's just my limited opinion of this thing. But
Thank you.
what do you think about that, Brother Collins? Does that make some sense?
It does. Yeah, well, yes.
I haven't worked it out fully, but
Yeah, I would love to hear you work it out fully. But and I'm sure the college kids, it's. I remember going to college and my grandmother saying, number one thing is, we're used to being used as part of a minority group. We're used to being, and she said, make sure you use them, and make sure get your diploma, get your degree, get your diploma. Make sure you use them, get that free education, and that's what I did. I graduated in 4 years from Stanford, and then ultimately went on to the NBA.
The next question, please.
My name is Rory Verrett. I'm a partner at the Rabin Group. We are a progressive advocacy organization in D.C. We count Union Theological Seminary as one of our clients.
Welcome.
I am also the younger brother of the best sportscaster in America, Stan Verrett, on ESPN. And I was most recently the Vice President of Public Affairs at the NFL before I joined the Rabin Group. And I want to get back to something Dr. West talked about, which is the commercial instinct of these organizations. Now, I can tell you, being in these rooms, that there is some discussion about social issues in sports leagues, but there is discussion about commercial issues every single day. There is not a commercial holiday at the NBA, the NHL, the NFL, or Major League Baseball. And so I want to get the panel's reaction to the notion of activating the LGBT consumer to accelerate the pace of change at these sports organizations. Sports is a great platform for us to see, as the panel talked about, heroism and courage and these social issues played out on a neutral platform, but they are run like businesses. And if you want to get the attention of a sports league, come with a pie chart that talks about the spending power of the LGBT consumer. You'll have a meeting in 5 minutes.
I'm going to take that one real quick. So San Diego, I want to talk about that for a minute. Padres. Some of our folks in San Diego in the LGBT community were getting harassed at some Padres games, and so the local community decided to do something about it exactly in that vein. Started out at the park, which is a day when the San Diego LGBT Pride organization buys a huge block of tickets, and then we sell them and then have a barbecue. Everybody brings their families, and started off as a small thing. Couple years later, got bigger and bigger, so that it really was a significant a block of seats that the LGBT community had invested in with our families, a really public, beautiful day. And then I believe it was 2 years ago, the San Diego Padres invited the gay men's chorus to sing the national anthem. So I think we need our people everywhere, and we need to show major sports that we are a consumer block, but we also need heroes to inspire us to show up to the games, people like Jason Collins to come out, right? So I think young folks need a hero, and then we also need to flex our political muscle as well.
Quickly, what I can say about that is when I did ultimately go back to the NBA and I signed with the Brooklyn Nets, my jersey was actually, for a time, was the #1 seller in the NBA. Ahead of LeBron, ahead of Kevin Durant, and that was crazy to me. That was mind-blowing to me. That for about 2 weeks, my jersey was the #1 jersey. And I mean, that's the thing. It's really cool to see people come up to me and have my jersey and want me to autograph it. Or I was out to dinner after a game at the coffee shop in Union Square, and a woman came up to me. She was at the game and she still had on my jersey, and I think that shows the spending power of the LGBT community. And I know that when Michael Sam, when he was with the St. Louis Rams and got drafted, again, there was a huge demand for his jersey. And I even remember one of the kids from, what's that band, One Direction, did a concert in St. Louis, and they had on a Michael Sam jersey, and people got media attention. And So in addition to spending, you also get media attention, and so yeah.
We unfortunately only have time for one more question. This conversation is so important. It could go on all afternoon, but we're going to give the brother here the last question.
Peace, everybody. My name is Davi. I'm an artist and choreographer. My work is to impact and shift minds to help folks realize their role as a universal being. So I follow in your legacies, and I thank you for your legacy. I wanted to speak. I have some friends who moved from Brooklyn to Amsterdam, and they're brother and sister, African American, and they chose to raise their child identifying people as the person, not a white person, not a male or female, but as a person. And that question began to run in my mind: how do we begin to shift the foundations of what it means to be a human, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of times we want to just fix what's in the pie rather than deal with what's in the crust, right? The seeds are in the crust. So how do we begin to rid ourselves of the human addiction to categories that support the isms and supremacies that we have already been living and dying in, and create it so that our babies can begin to be and accept all?
I'm going to answer this question from maybe I'm not going to give you the answer that you want. So if you don't, we'll have somebody else answer the question. But I'm a psychologist, and I study stereotypes and stigma and outsider status. And one of the things that we know is that our brains are wired to think in terms of categories. It's quick, it's efficient, it's a way to save cognitive resources. So to categorize people as male, female, black, Latino, white, Native American is something that our brains almost do automatically, and we start doing it at the age of 14 months. And so, and there's even research showing that people with all kinds of neurological disorders retain those categories. So I think one way to think about it is not so much how we can move beyond those categories, because they're a natural part of the way individuals process information, but how can we change what those categories mean in society. So you can categorize and to add on more categories. So masculine and feminine is not enough. A male bathroom and a female bathroom is not enough. A women's swim team and a men's swim team is not enough. We need to add new categories. And then we need to change the underlying discrimination and stereotypes that are associated with the categories that we already have. So that's the way, as a psychologist, the way I think about brain structures would answer that question. And maybe the rest of the panel can address
and
that
as
as well.
a Christian, I would say that I love your attempt to stay in contact with the humanity of others, but I would reject your strategy because I am suspicious of people who are colorblind, gender blind, national blind, sexual orientational blind. See, as Christians, we are told to be love-struck, not colorblind. You see what I mean? So I see you, I see a brilliant, wonderful, handsome black brother, but you are embodied. You're in your body. You came out of your mama's womb. And it's your humanity and all of its embodiment that is embraced. And therefore, if we can use the categories, and we must psychologically, we can't use those categories in such a way that it obscures your humanity. The same is true for a white brother, Asian sister, and so forth across the board. But it requires tremendous spiritual work, moral development, courage in order to do that, because most of the world is so obsessed with the categories.
Thank you so much. I would like to end this panel. We will turn it back over to you. This was wonderful. Thank you to all of our panelists.
And thanks to our most able moderator. Thank you. Thank you, Valerie. So our panelists have agreed to stay just for a brief time if you want to come up and ask a question. But if you're going to do that, be brief. If you want to take a photo, but be brief. But thank all of you. This conversation continues. We have miles to go before we rest, but as often been said, a journey of 1,000,000 miles begins with the first step, and we had that first step of many steps that we'll take today. I want to also thank Derek McQueen, who is a PhD student here, who also serves on the staff of the Center at Columbia with Yosef, and who was recently elected the moderator of the Presbytery of New York City as an out gay man. So thank you, Derek. Thanks to all of you.